Hi, welcome to the on-demand workshop series here at Columbia College. My name is Mohit, and today we're going to talk about exam stress and anxiety, as well as some studying tips on how to study for exams more effectively. So this workshop's going to be in three different parts. In part one, we're going to talk a little bit about why we get stressed and anxious, where those negative feelings come from, and what purpose do they serve. Then we're going to talk a little bit about how to alleviate the stress and anxiety. And finally, we'll introduce some studying techniques to help you study more effectively and also manage those negative symptoms of stress and anxiety. So, stress and anxiety. So, first of all, why do we get stressed and anxious? Where do these feelings come from? So, many generations ago, thousands of years ago, we used to be hunters and gatherers. And so, what that means is things like food, shelter, water, general safety for our well-being was not always there. We had to hunt for our food, we had to grow food if we even could, and really it was hard to determine when we would get our next meal, if we were safe and secure from predators, all of these things. And so our brain has kind of wired us to attenuate towards these sort of threats, right? And so stress and anxiety kind of comes from your brain signaling to your body that this thing is important. It's something that I should be aware of, and it's stressful to me because it's important to me. It's something that requires my attention or focus for survival. So thousands of years ago, our stress and anxiety responses have kind of been built mostly for our own survival. They've been built to help us stay alive, to be aware of threats, and proactively sort of work against them or figure out ways to stay alive and healthy. So in a very real sense, stress and anxiety at its core has been uh, fundamental in keeping humans alive for a very long time. But if we fast forward to today, clearly we don't really have that much of a use for stress and anxiety. I mean, our basic needs are taken care of. We have food, we have shelter, but now it's the stress and anxiety comes up in things like school, like work, deadlines, relationships, perhaps. And so that same feeling of threat before, where it was used for our survival, is now sort of coming up in different ways just throughout our day-to-day lives, which are a lot less stressful, but also a lot more stressful compared to days of the past, hunter-gatherer times. But this is kind of where stress and anxiety comes from, and from an evolutionary perspective, and why it's kind of important for our body to have. Stress is good. It tells us, what do we need to focus our attention on. So I want to sort of take that idea of stress and frame it into human behavior, human action. And so I'm going to sort of frame it in two ways. One is urgency and one is focus. So urgency happens when we kind of feel like we have to sort of get something done in an urgent manner. For example, imagine you're trying to catch a sky train or a bus, and you're going to be taking to go to work or just go to school. And so urgency is your body telling you, okay, I have to get myself onto this SkyTrain or bus because it's important for me and it's urgent for me to get to my next task. Whereas focus is sort of more our perception and our attenuation of our senses to help us get through that. So, for example, with the SkyTrain example or the bus, if you're trying to catch that, you're trying to focus your entire attention on getting there on time. Maybe you're running fast, maybe you're checking your phone, you're checking to see when the next bus or SkyTrain will come. And urgency sort of allows you to attenuate to what is important, and focus kind of helps you kind of narrow in on that thing. So urgency and focus is kind of a framework. These two things work together for any immediate human behavior that could be stressful or could create anxiety, which of course happens if we're running late for catching a bus or SkyTrain. So the brain signals to our body that something requires our urgent attention, and this task requires a level of focus to complete. This signal comes through stress hormones released in your body with tasks that require urgency. And so things that are more urgent for you, like catching a bus in the next few minutes, is going to be more stressful for you than, let's say, trying to catch a bus a month from now, knowing you're going to be planning for an event to go somewhere, right? So the more urgent it is, the more stress hormones are released because your body is telling you this thing is urgent. So anxiety can come from having difficulty managing stress. So sometimes we know what's important, things like urgent deadlines, but it could be hard to focus, like start studying, for example. So with urgency here, with exam stress, you know that a deadline's coming up for a final project or a final paper or exam, but it's the urgency may be so strong, the stress hormones in your body might be so strong that it could actually sometimes be hard to focus. In this case, starting to study or starting to work on that project. So now that we kind of talked a little bit about what stress and anxiety is, where it comes from, and the idea of urgency and focus, let's look at maybe a model on how we can delegate our tasks or figure out what actually is, the most urgent thing that requires my focused attention. And if we frame the question this way, it becomes pretty clear and obvious once we go through this what actually is more urgent and important than other things. So clearly, you want to focus on categories of tasks that are here, urgent and important. These are things that are coming up for you and that it's important for you to focus your attention on. There's also going to be tasks that are urgent but not important, maybe things like a dinner date or something coming up like a planned event. It could be urgent, but maybe it's not really 100% important for you to attend. Of course, we also have tasks that are not urgent and not important. These could be generally time wasters, like Netflix, and then also not urgent but important. So you can kind of frame tasks into one of these four categories where they're low urgency or high urgency and low importance or high importance. So the axes are flipped a little bit here, but things that are urgent and important, things like homework that's due tomorrow or a club meeting that you might be leading, these are things you should probably be focusing on more immediately, doing them basically now. Of course, there will be important things that are not so urgent. That could be things like your general exercise and health and well-being, or an exam coming up in a week or two from now. So they are important, they're required, you should pay attention to them, but you don't have to focus on them right then and there. So they're not urgent. So you can plan these events into your maybe next week or next 2 weeks. Also, there's things that are urgent and not important. This is things like, again, going to a dinner with a friend or some club meeting or interruption. Things will come up in your life every day. They will be urgent, but are they important? And if not, then you can decide to delegate them or do something else with them. See if they can fit in with your schedule or not. And finally, things that are not urgent and also not important. You might find that you're spending the most amount of time in this category when you are procrastinating, because really you should be here in this area doing your work. But this is sort of catching up on Netflix, social media, TikTok, Facebook. These things are not really urgent and they're not really important. So of course it's of course ideal to try to eliminate these as much as you can. So that's kind of a general category or framework where you can kind of place your tasks in depending on where you think they are, whether they're urgent and important or not urgent and not important, and anywhere in between. And this kind of helps you sort of prioritize your tasks so you know kind of what I should be working on. Sometimes we have a lot of things coming up for us at once, and this is one way to sort of parse your tasks and know which ones you should focus on first. So just a brief sort of model to tackle that. And to tackle that question of what is the most urgent thing that requires my focused attention, going through this, writing things down, really helps with that. So now that we talked a little bit about stress and anxiety, what it is, and also how to maybe delegate some of our tasks, we still haven't talked at all about how do we reduce our stress and anxiety. So what happens when we're so stressed or so anxious that these planning our tasks, knowing what's urgent and what's not urgent, it's all so overwhelming to even think about. So we'll talk a little bit about what we can do to reduce that stress and anxiety in our lives. So with exams, difficulty studying could mean that your urgency response is overactivated and it becomes hard to focus, like we talked about earlier. Reducing our stress and managing anxious symptoms can help us focus better and retain more of what we learned and perform better on exams. So in a way, we are kind of working on your mental health, but in a way it will actually directly also affect your exam grades and your scores. So if we reduce our stress, or that urgency and focus, kind of those two mechanisms will be more in sync. You won't be overwhelmed with the urgency, and you are actually hopefully able to focus more and in turn do better on your exams and projects. So here's some tips for that. So the first one is, of course, sleep. It's definitely underrated. We all struggle with sleep, and I think definitely post-COVID, it's really hard to have a regular routine of any kind. But if you can, maintain a regular sleep cycle where you are trying to get at least 8 hours of regular sleep. So recall and recognition memory actually both drop when we get consistently less than 8 hours of sleep, and I'll talk a bit about why that's important. But also another tip is studying with distractions put away. So that means no phone, no roommates. When you're sitting down to do the work, you should kind of put everything else aside. And because multitasking is largely a myth. Very, very few of us can actually successfully manage and juggle multiple tasks at once. And so it's just more effective to sit down and focus all of our attention on one thing at a time. That's even just to be more graceful towards ourselves, because of course we're also overwhelmed when we're studying for exams. And set small goals for yourself, something like I'm only going to study for 2 minutes. And so what that does is, by timing yourself, you can kind of see how bearable it really is. So could you do another minute after that 2 minute timer is up? Sometimes setting very small, achievable goals can be easier to build up instead of setting really big ones, like I'm going to study all day the day before the exam with no breaks. I'm sure a lot of us have done that before, cramming for exams, but it's definitely, not very helpful in terms of how much you actually learn. And by setting small goals for yourself, like I only do 2 minutes or 5 minutes, whatever is barely manageable, you can kind of set yourself up to start. And then after that, promise yourself that if it is too unbearable, I can stop after 2 minutes are over. And if it's not unbearable, can you add to that? And so the idea is start from the bottom with very, very small goals instead of the top with very, very large goals. Because, of course, if you set large goals and you don't meet them, you're going to just sort of put it on yourself and feel worse about the whole situation, more stressed, more anxious. And so take frequent study breaks. Cramming studying into longer periods into long periods at once is unsustainable and can lead to emotional burnout and fatigue. Of course, if it's close to the deadline of exams and you haven't really started yet, it's not an option. But if you, for next semester or in the future, if you are able to sort of take some time and set it aside for a few weeks before the exam, take frequent study breaks and sort of study in chunks. And of course, breathing techniques can also help us feel more relaxed as well, and we'll do an example of that later today. So studying tips. Here's some tips just for how do we effectively study. So we kind of just covered, how do we reduce our stress and anxiety. Now we're kind of shifting gears a little bit to more practical ways on how we can actually improve our studying skills. So the first is something called distributed learning, which is learning in frequent intervals, and of course, actually sleeping as soon as you can after you study. So something like a 30-minute study blocks with 15-minute breaks. If you can do those maybe a few days every week before your big exam is coming up, and sleeping right after you practice or learn the material. When you sleep, it's actually like hitting the save button on a Word document. When you are working throughout the day and you're taking in these new experiences, you're learning things from classes, that knowledge is actually consolidated into your memory when we sleep at night. And so the more nights of sleep you have, the more times you can basically hit that save button in your brain, and the more opportunities your brain has to memorize and the material that you're trying to learn and study for. Um, Also, testing yourself regularly. So, recall and recognition memory are two different types of memory systems that our working memory kind of works and uses when we're trying to learn the new things. So, recall memory is something that you're trying to actively recall. So, fill in the blank questions would use your recall memory, which is you trying to fill in the answer by thinking about it and seeing if you can remember it. Recognition memory is something like choose from the following options, and you get sort of an A, B, C, D. And there you try to recognize the answers in front of you, but you're trying to recognize and identify the correct one. So recall and recognition memory are both different memory systems, but again, they're both affected by poor sleep quality. but they both, if you test yourself using both techniques by recalling your answers to yourself or doing some multiple choice questions online or creating them for yourself, that can help you sort of get the information more consolidated in both memory systems so you can bring them out again when you're being tested and perform better. And finally, mnemonic devices, things like primary colors, planets. Roy G. Biv is a famous acronym for the primary colors of the rainbow. We also have My Very Educated Mother Just Served Us Noodles, which is sort of an acronym for the planets of our solar system in order from how far they are from the sun. So with mnemonic devices, you can consolidate a lot of information into something like a simple phrase or a word. And if you can memorize things that way, it really helps you, compact your learning into something that's easier to learn instead of a list of things. Some more tips, you can also use flashcards to help improve recall memory. So things like brainscape.com or cram.com allows you to use digital flashcards, but you can also go to Staples or something and pick up some physical flashcards. The idea is having the questions on one side and the answer on the reverse, and testing yourself that way can really help improve that recall memory. Setting a workspace, time of day, environment that is consistently used only for work is really helpful as well. So this is something called paired associations. If you imagine yourself maybe going to a gym, you know that there's a whole routine around going to the gym. You have your phone, your headphones, you drive or commute to the gym. Once you enter, you're going to be working out in a certain area. You're going to be in a certain mental state and physical state in that environment. And that's because all these paired associations go alongside that act of working out. And so similarly, when we're at home trying to learn material or study, it's helpful to set aside a certain workspace or a time of day or an environment where that all you do is work, so that when you do enter that environment, those paired associations help you get into the act of working sooner and more effectively. Another tip is something called elaborative interrogation. This is kind of described in the term itself. So, elaborative interrogation is where you're elaboratively interrogating yourself. So, you can ask yourself questions as you learn your study materials. Why does this information work? How is it applied in real world contexts? How does it relate to existing knowledge I might have about the subject? And by asking these deeper questions, it sort of gets you to really think about the material that you're reading, and you're not just sort of browsing over it mindlessly without really taking anything in for yourself. So elaborative interrogation really helps you with making sure and testing yourself, like how deeply do I really know this material, and how does it fit with everything else that I might know about this area or this class. Also, make lists. Again, it's about small, manageable goals. Your goals should be so easy that they're almost too easy to accomplish. And the goal here is really to gain momentum. So, we get a small rush in our brains if we actually check off something on our list of tasks to do. And if those tasks are really big, like write a 10-page paper, then that task could be really overwhelming. But if we break that 10-page paper task down into smaller tasks, like I'm going to start the title page, or I'm going to read the syllabus, or I'm going to look for my references and do some readings, or whatever it might be. There's ways to break down a bigger task into a smaller task, always. And the goal is to make the tasks so small, so manageable, that it's almost funny that you're writing them down as tasks. And so as you start checking them off, you can kind of gauge for yourself what's too difficult for me or what's too easy for me. And eventually you hopefully gain momentum by completing these tasks and ultimately getting more done instead of just setting up large tasks for yourself that are generally very difficult to do in one sitting. So making lists and tracking things like that is very helpful as well. All right, so we're gonna pause here, and what we're gonna be doing is doing a brief mindfulness breathing exercise. So this helps us sort of regulate our emotions, but also help us reduce anxiety and stress physiologically in our bodies. So what I'm gonna ask you to do is we're gonna sit back, if you can, into your chair, or maybe lay down if you can. Maybe you can put your arms on top of your legs or to your side. And we're just going to take some deep breaths. In through the nose. And out through the mouth. Breathe as you normally do. But with full deep breaths. You can keep your eyes open or closed. And there's no goal here. All we're doing is noticing our breath. You might notice some noises in your room or outside your room. Maybe an itch somewhere in your body. Or maybe you're thinking about school, work, what I have to do when I'm done this exercise. We're just going to notice those thoughts without judgment. You can have positive thoughts, negative thoughts. As you breathe deeply, just notice. Nothing has to be done. Sometimes we hold stress and anxiety inside of our bodies. Maybe it's your shoulders or your chest tightening up. As you inhale, bring awareness to that part of your body. And exhale and release that tension. you can join me here and say out loud, I am not my thoughts. I am not my feelings. I experience thoughts. I experience feelings. But they are not a part of who I am. They are not me. And when you're ready, you can gently open your eyes if they were closed. And bring some subtle movements back into our bodies. You can hear those cracks. That's me stretching my body. And just gently roll your neck, stretch your wrists, stretch your arms, and slowly come back up if you were laying down or sitting. Okay, and that was a brief mindfulness breathing exercise. Hopefully, you're feeling a little bit better, at least. And these exercises, they're not meant to sort of fix our stress and anxiety, but they can really help us in identifying, maybe where in our body we're feeling that stress or what kind of thoughts or emotions are racing through us. And sometimes even just noticing those and taking that moment to step back helps us in tackling, first as noticing, then as understanding, and then as tackling, how can we get our goals accomplished? How can we focus on being healthy, but also getting things done in a way that is sustainable? And, mindfulness breathing is just a small part of that that could potentially help. All right, and that concludes our workshop for today. I hope you learned a thing or two about stress and anxiety, not only what it is and what its role is in our lives, but also how can we manage it better and sort of study more effectively. Sometimes there are still going to be moments in our lives where events happen, maybe things outside of our control, work, family, relationships. And so sometimes those things can be so overwhelming that no amount of stress or anxiety workshops or mindfulness breathing can really help you get out of those emotions that you're feeling or the thoughts and what's happening in your life. And so sometimes it can be helpful to talk to a counselor. And so of course I just want to quickly plug our counseling services. So we do offer counseling to our students here at Columbia College, and you're free to book with us online. Here's also my email on the slide, so you can email me directly too if you have any questions, or if you just like to talk to somebody. Because sometimes, what we're going through is so overwhelming that it just might just be hard to think straight, let alone study for exams or get through our day. And so in those circumstances, it could really help to just talk to somebody, including one of our counselors who you can reach out to. With that, there's also a website link where you can book with us directly and my email as well. And if you have any other questions, feel free to reach out. And thanks for watching this workshop, and hopefully you learned a thing or two, and we'll catch you next time. Bye.